I Rick reached out to me yesterday or the day before. I'm the type of person that I don't really like to miss an opportunity. So I thought I would pull something together um, to address and celebrate Martin Luther King Jr. But I will end with the Bible in a minute. But I also like to share that many of you on the call this morning, this may be a refresher course or the next 5 minutes for you. I'm sure you may have heard it in the past, but this is what I pulled together because I didn't want to miss an opportunity. So keep that in mind, please. So I'm going to begin with Martin Luther King Jr. was born January 15th, 1929. Many of us already know that. We are totally aware that many of us confuse it with January 14th, January 15th, January 16th. But according to his website for his bio, it's 1929, January 15th. Martin Luther King, he studied and became a Baptist minister and social rights activist, leader of the American Civil Rights Movement. We know that he has done several programs and projects in his time. In his 39 years, he accomplished a Nobel Peace Prize. He was the youngest to ever to receive a peace prize, a Nobel Peace Prize, for his dynamic leadership for nonviolence. And as we all know today, nonviolence is not a watered down term, but not everyone is following the footsteps of Martin Luther King Jr. and many others. But we do know that we want peace. We do know that we want justice. And those type of actions may call for, I'm not promoting violence, but some, and we know that some have actually gone in that direction. We all know that April 4th, 1968, and what we are hearing most today is the assassination of Martin Luther King after delivering his iconic speech, I Have a Dream. Until today, we still, many of us, still live and try to deliver I have a dream. We all have a dream, and we try to deliver it the best way we can based on Martin Luther King's direction. However, many have followed Martin Luther King nonviolence. Many have followed. For example, the Reverend James Lawson, which belongs to this organization, I believe, was connected to this. Actually, September 22nd, he turned 95 years old. So Martin Luther King would be what if he was living today? But we know he was assassinated. Let that sink in. But the Reverend James Lawson has carried the torch, for long, 60 plus years. Whereas that the Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors recognized the Reverend James Lawson for his leadership in carrying the torch for nonviolence, fighting for justice, pushing for justice. Thank you.
John Parker has been an activist and organizer for the better part of, close to 50 years, I suppose. He started when he was 14 years old in the farm workers, supporting the farm workers. Currently, he's running for U.S. Congress in the 37th Assembly District. He's the coordinator of the Harriet Tubman Center for Social Justice. And you know what? I'm just going to leave it at that. And he's a wonderful person. That's my totally biased opinion. And it's probably objective too.
Okay, John, the floor is yours.
Okay, well, I like that. I agree with oh man, I forgot your name, the woman, Jeanette. I definitely agree with the need to fight evil. I'm well, although I'm not religious, but I agree with the when you see evil, you recognize it and you gotta fight it. And we're seeing so much of it right now, in the bombing of Gaza. I want to back into my little story here with stuff about Yemen. They say about 300,000 people were killed in Saudi Arabia's war that was supported by the U.S. Um, uh, um, uh, and they're also, of course, are supporting the wars in Gaza. I guess it was last year or so, the U.S. was fueling the planes and helping with the weapons in the war against the over 300,000 people who were killed in Yemen. And we're wondering why now are the British and the U.S. killing bombing the people of Yemen, killed six people. Well, they're fighting in the defense of Gaza. Nasrallah, which is what the imperialist Western media calls them, the Houthis. I guess it's really the Nasrallah. They lead the military in Yemen, and they said that they're only targeting Israeli ships or those that are headed towards Israel. And as the Popular Front of Liberation of Palestine and Hezbollah and Hamas are saying that this is a courageous act that's trying to stop the continuing massacres of by a person who really acts like a Nazi, Netanyahu. It seems like the Yemen is setting a good example. It's a country that it's doing something that most countries, every country should really do to stop a humanitarian slaughter, with 70% of the children being 70% being children and women in Gaza. And although the corporate media is continuing the story a lot less, so you're not hearing about it as much now, it doesn't mean it's happening less. It's still continuing on a horrific pace. It's children, maybe hundreds of children are dying as we speak, and babies, and it's incomprehensible. And Yemen is doing this. What they're doing has to be contrasted with what the Democrats and Republicans here, and even the liberal Democrats, refuse to do. They don't want to call for a ceasefire. This is why I felt like I had to do something about it. And this war is that of killing the 300,000 by Saudi, supported by the U.S. Even a liberal Democrat like Bernie Sanders, in saying he wanted to try to stop the support for the Saudi massacre of the Yemen people. He said he presented a bill. The bill had a backdoor way of clause that said, well, the U.S. shouldn't supply any aid to the Saudis in this war if uh, um, but they shouldn't do it. But if Al Qaeda is in the area, then that goes away. They can still support the Saudis. Well, Al Qaeda was there because the U.S., in the instance of the fight against Yemen, they were working with Al Qaeda. So basically, that bill meant nothing. And although I think Bernie Sanders is saying he's for the ceasefire, that's good, that's great. But the Democrats and Republicans and the politicians, they're not doing what they should do to stop this massacre that we're seeing. This is why I had to go to Egypt. I couldn't sleep at night seeing what was going on. When the lie and the justification of this white supremacist, racist genocide against the Palestinian people was being legitimized by the corporate companies like corporate media like the New York Times and the Washington Post and CNN. It seems like the only way to get the news out is to sometimes you have to go to the conflict and expose the war crimes and the Holocaust of Israel and the United States. That's why I also decided there's in my district, 37th district, congressional district, there's 3 candidates and an incumbent who they refuse to even shed a thought about the Palestinian deaths and only say they support Israel. Can't do that when there's a Holocaust going on. So the only thing that's going to make them maybe change their view or call for a ceasefire is to expose what they're supporting. So that's why I went to Egypt to help make that happen and get into the race of the congressional 37th district. So when there's an debate or whatever, they're going to have to answer that question. Now, although the Western imperialist military and the Egyptian media is full of journalists who have the courage to honestly report what's going on, and including on the incidents of October 7th. These journalists they belong to a union in Egypt. A union has a very impressive building. It's in Cairo. It's called the Egyptian Syndicate of Journalists. And this is the only place where you can protest in Egypt. They have protests there on the building, the steps going out to the sidewalk. But if you step off of that sidewalk, you're going to get arrested. So they can have protests there. And when I went to Egypt, November 24th, I think it was, we went there joining a delegation, the World Conscious Convoy, which was trying to get aid into Gaza. So we were supposed to go into Rafah, and the journalists were petitioning the foreign ministry in Egypt to be able to get allowed to go there. When we went there, they still weren't able to get there. There was an international delegation of journalists, medical folks, and peace activists that were there trying to help build this effort. So when we found out that they're not allowing this convoy to go through, and when we got there, I think we had after a week or so, there was only 2 days left to end the ceasefire. The temporary ceasefire was ending in 2 days. So we knew, if there's going to get some aid in there and some reporting and allowing of the people in Gaza to tell their stories, you only had 2 days to do that. So we had a delegate. We took the U.S. delegates that were in Egypt and Cairo. We went to the U.S. embassy there, and we confronted them. We got a meeting with them finally, with the help of the Egyptian lawyers, and they spoke to us and they said oh, it's a shame what's going on. We said, well, can't you use your leverage? We know you have a big influence on Egypt. Can't you use your influence to allow the aid to get in? And they said, well, we have no influence with Egypt. And we said, well, you send Egypt a lot of weapons, and they're like the second largest folks who are funded by the U.S. So what do you mean you don't have any? He said, well, we use weapons to get leverage. And so I said, well, you send them a lot of weapons, but you don't have leverage. So it just shows that all these things they were saying, and the fact that they were, we were exposing, just to put it on record. The massacres that are going on, what you're doing, you're supporting, you're sending the weapons, whether it's with Congress or not with Congress, you're sending these weapons and these artillery, and you're doing it, but you say it's a shame, and you do nothing about it. So we wanted to put that on record. So when we realized that wasn't going to go anywhere, we decided to do a protest, which you could only do if you're an international guest. The Egyptians really would put them at risk to have a protest in Egypt. So the international delegates went there to the foreign ministry, and we unfurled a banner that said, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. And then we were going to send a letter asking again to get the aid into Gaza. But as soon as we unfurled that banner, we were arrested right away. One delegate from France, from Australia, and Argentina, and myself were listed away into a police station. We didn't know where we were. For 24 hours, nobody knew where we were as well. So it was a little bit scary. We were able to get the information out, but it was interesting trying to get there, and it was a little bit scary. And we were in detention for totally 37 hours before they put us on the plane. And it was really interesting that the soldiers, some of the cops, and they were telling us as we were there that we agree with what you're doing, and it's interesting. Everybody there in Egypt, including the corporate media, had the same take on what was going on in Gaza. They refused to condemn Hamas. They were very angry about people and family they were losing there. So that was something even the soldiers were saying, we support what you're doing, but we have the higher ups that can't let you out. So it was interesting. After 31 hours of the detention, we felt like, well, we're not going to get out of here. We don't know what's going to happen. So I decided, well, I'm going to tell a joke. I'm going to lighten up the spirit. And they said, well, you need some coffee. What do you need? I said, well, when are we going to get out? And they said it again, well, we have to wait for the higher ups. So I said, well, you mean Muhammad? So I said, okay, well, they're either going to laugh or they're going to want to kill me. But they chose a laughter. We all had a good laugh at that. But then, later on, we were out, and they said, as I was leaving, they said, we like what you're doing, and you are welcome back. Of course, they didn't have the authority. They had to do it from the folks up top, from President Sisi. But it shows, what's going on in Egypt in terms of poverty, the wages, the monthly wages that they get are, it's hard for people in Egypt to survive. So, there might be a coup. Sometimes there are lots of coups. Who knows what's going to happen? But if the economic crisis gets worse, things are going to happen. But also, the President Sisi was trying to keep it very quiet about what was going on. And that's why they whisked us away and tried to keep it out of the news. But local media and national media reported the next day what was going on. And so it wasn't quiet. And it was also like an attempt to try to expose what the U.S. imperialist governments are doing in support of Israel's massacres. And the stories got out. Yeah, one of the reasons and motivations for President Sisi to attempt to cover this up and my dog, sorry. Hey, I think he doesn't like the cat that he saw over here before. But that's the sectarianism of the dogs and the cats. We got to do something about that.
But
anyway,
while you're doing that, can everybody else go on mute? That would be great. Maybe that's what John's dog was trying to say.
Yeah. There you go. So, let's see if I get. So anyway, the position of President Sisi is not popular, of course, with the Egyptian folks. And one of the motivations of that has to do with oil in occupied Palestine. I guess early 2000, there was oil, natural gas that was found on the shores of Gaza, and the U.S. and Israel. Sorry, 2008, they took it over in spite of and against international law. They took the area over. And then on 2000 and 2019. After they took that over, the United States was pushing Egypt to be a part of the exploitation of the carbon resources in cooperation with Egypt. So Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and others were part of this deal. And then after 2019, they found 122 trillion cubic feet of natural gas, and in the West Bank, they found 1.7 billion barrels of recoverable oil. So this was a big push to exploit this oil, and it's really a crime that fuel is being denied to the people of Gaza when they have babies that are being taken out of incubators, not by the Iraqi soldiers, like the lie they did about to get folks into the Iraqi war. No, this time doctors were taking babies in Gaza out of incubators because they couldn't function without fuel. So they tried to keep them alive. And of course, they weren't able to keep many of them alive. And so the fuel, the water, the food that's being denied is causing, in addition to the bombs, of course, is causing so many things. This fuel that they discovered on the shores of Gaza and in the West Bank could have solved that problem, but they don't have control. Israel's occupation controls those resources, and the United States was using the bombing of the Nord Stream pipeline in Ukraine. That whole war, there's a connection between that. There's a connection between China's Belt and Road, Silk and Road project, which was getting IMF and World Bank. The Global South didn't have to depend on those sources so much, which keeps them in debt. The other Chinese and Russia economic things that were going on in Global South had mutual interests in terms of building the infrastructure and things like that. And the United States didn't want that. And so they pushed last September, I think it was in Indian media, Indian Middle Eastern convoy was being pushed. And that was a alternative way of getting oil from India to Greece. It would go from India to Saudi Arabia to Jordan to Israel, Haifa, to go right to Greece, and that was supposed to take over the natural gas that was being denied after that pipeline destruction. So there's a big link between what was going on and the PFLP, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine, and Hamas, said that they, in their statement, that they did this operation October 7th to stop a deal that was going on with Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and other countries to make this Indian Middle Eastern convoy possible. So it's really interesting that not only people say, well, it was just Hamas, this was a united action by the DFLP, PFLP, and not only is Gaza being targeted, but the West Bank as well. So there's a lot of misinformation that's coming from the Israeli defense and from Israeli sources, and the New York Times and Washington, like they usually do, when the U.S. has a target, they help the vilification, and they never go to their sources, the other sources. You know, when they said that those weapons of mass destruction are when the incubator was stored, they never got the story from the point of view are the interviews from the Saddam Hussein or the Iraqi officials, just like this. And the New York Times never goes to Hamas to interview them to see what are they saying about this. I mean, they're saying they're not they didn't target civilians. They say, but you never get that view. You never get the view from the Palestinians who were abused over 75 years. You never, about what they saw on October 7th, you don't get that side of the story. So folks should question the information that's going on there, just like what's going on in Ukraine. Anyway, I'll stop there. I'm going on a lot. I can answer questions and things like that. Okay, I should also say too that how do we fit into this? How do we fit into this crisis that's going on right now? As people, you see the thing and you realize, oh, you know, the inflation's here, poverty, things are getting worse. We have less health care. We have all this money is going to the military-industrial complex, the trillions of dollars they keep sending there, so we see that these crises don't do anything for the people because of all this money that's being thrown to the military-industrial complex and others. And you know, we know the history of the history of the occupation that's been going on. But what we're seeing now is in this crisis is people are becoming more unified in their struggle against the Biden administration and Republicans and just fighting injustice. And I think this is the first time we've seen so much solidarity between the Jewish peoples and Palestinian peoples. You go to these demonstrations, see the Jewish Voices for Peace, you see others, and you see, you know, there's always been a history of solidarity between Black liberation forces in Palestine as well. But this is really helping. I see so much militance against Jewish people that are in New York, what is that place? Grand Central Station, sit-ins, doing all these kinds of things, which is very inspiring. And we're inspiring that people are not going to tolerate genocide. So we just have to keep on that fight, even though the media doesn't want to report about it. We got to keep doing what we have to do to build this movement. Just more and more, the U.S. is getting so isolated, and the people of countries are not going to tolerate this, and we're going to join hands. And that's it.
Steve, if you'd like to.
Thank you, John. A two-part question. One is really just to wrap up your story, your personal story. How were you able to get released? And are you free to would you be able to return to Egypt and continue your protests? And is there any nascent pro-democracy movement in Egypt that you became aware of? And secondly, what's your strategy here in the United States to move these goals forward? What allies do you see in Congress? And what can people do to stop this genocide?
Yeah. So let's see. So it is interesting how it got out. My son bought me a watch that has a chip in it, a SIM card. They told us we couldn't use our phones. That's one thing they respect, though. If you don't have a warrant to take someone's phone, they're not allowed to take it. So they did honor that, but they told us we had to turn it off and things. But I had a watch that allowed me, after 24 hours of being in detention, I was able to get the information out to the Egyptian lawyers and to other folks here. And they were calling the embassy, the U.S. embassy, Egyptian embassy, and others. Because I didn't know. After 24 hours, I wouldn't know what was going to happen if they didn't find out. But luckily, we were able to get out. So that all of us were able to get there. The first from France, Australia, and Argentina. And one of the people's, they're activists. Also, the woman from Australia is called, has the whistleblowers organization or something. So they're still fighting on this struggle to put pressure on the government, on their own governments. But the convoy, the World Conscious Convoy, is still trying to be organized. They're still trying to get aid into the Egyptian movement, and that is becoming a very one of the places where the political movement and the struggle, progressive movement, is taking place in the Egyptian syndicate journalists. Usually every year or so, and during elections for the journalists, the Union of Journalists, it would be very close to the government. And they would kind of put the leadership there in place of that organization. But last March, they were able to. It was becoming more and more unpopular. The government forces that were pro-government, they put in a socialist in March of the syndicate. And after they did that, the politics started changing, the protests and things. So that's one of the places that are one of the, I guess, what you call progressive or democratic movements that are fighting here, and they are creating some kind of international relationships too with forces that we're trying to encourage others to be a part of as well. And then what we could do, we decided to do is we want to push this campaign, the congressional campaign, putting as much pressure as we can on them. So that's one of the things. And also, the Martin Luther King march that we were initiated. This was a march after the Kingdom Day parade, which is very corporate. Costs $500 for community groups to get into it. and it always has the police and the military and ROTC, which isn't really much like MLK's message. So and 2 years ago, we took it over. This time, we didn't really have much time. I'm in detention and trying to do this thing. So we had 2 weeks to organize the MLK March, which was very successful. But next year, one of the things, so what we did, we had the Palestinian flag, it's happening in South Central in the Black community. So, and the Latinx community. So we had a flag for the lead flatbed truck that was leading the march with a Palestinian flag and a Black liberation flag, and Al Awda and PYM, the Palestinian Youth Movement, were part of that. This as well as the All African People's Revolutionary Party, Black Alliance for Peace, Black Men Build, Code Pink, and others were part of this unified, diverse action. So that was one of the things we want to keep encouraging, and of course to support the protests that are going on, and finding other ways and forums and things to get the message of not allowing this massacres.
I see Elliot stand up and Bill Francis. Elliot, you want to ask something?
Sure. John, very helpful. Really appreciate both your work and also your reporting on it. I have a question. Would it make sense for other people to go back to no? Is it possible, feasible, and would it be effective for other people to go back to the Rafah border? Maybe just to make a U.S. presence there.
Yeah, it's a really good. It's really helpful, I think, to get over there and do it. It's interesting. There were some forces that I think there were more of the non-profit forces that were one of them that was in there. They were saying they didn't want us to publicize that we were there, the international guests. They said, well, this is a story for them, not a story for us. And we rejected that and said, no, that's one of the main things we want to do, is show that especially the US and France was there and Germany was there, delegates were there. And we wanted we have to show that we're here in support of the Palestinian people to have some influence in the imperialist countries, to say that, you can't hide from this. It's happening. But getting to Rafah is almost impossible until there's another ceasefire. But they won't get you. We couldn't get out of Cairo, so we couldn't, let alone get into Rafah. That was one of the ideas, was to go there and have a sit-in Rafah, right on the border. But you couldn't even get there. The Egyptian military wouldn't allow it. So, but it still exists. The convoy organizing. So they're still gonna keep trying.
Yeah. Bill Francis and then Maggie.
I just want to say thank you. And John, you and Maggie didn't mention that you were on the convoy after Cass led and what happened there. And I was there with you, and I wonder if you could speak on that.
Yeah, that was it. And we got into Gaza. Right. We had to wait about 2 weeks, I think, because we had cars that were going in there, because people in the doctors needed to do house visits, because it was healthcare was so hard. So we had cars that were shipping from Egypt into Gaza. We were but the Egyptian government, they wouldn't allow us to take those cars. But we did get to go there. I was with Ramsey Clark as well, and it was interesting too to see, because I saw in Egypt, I saw a lot of homeless folks. When we went to the border in Gaza, I saw no homeless people. I saw the social services, in spite of all of the denial by Israel to get your basic stuff. It seemed like no one was, I didn't see any homeless people. It seemed like children were being taken care of. So basic things were going on. So a lot of the characterization of these so-called psychopathic, horrible Hamas people and the horrible, horrible things that they're saying, we didn't see that. It seems like we didn't see that type of thing. And of course, there's contradictions in every organization and government and things like that. But it makes you wonder, all the destruction and they destroyed with using depleted uranium again. And I saw children playing near these places, and that means more leukemia, more cancer things going on. But you saw that, and you saw in the midst of all this, you're still seeing people being fed. So it was interesting.
Hey, Maggie, I think you're up next.
I think Steve Rohde always words this better than I can, but he always asks what was your early background that led you to have the courage and the inspiration to do this kind of thing?
Oh, a lot of, well, it was me and our organization, Harriet Tubman Center, and my comrades and stuff that kind of give us each the courage to want to fight this stuff, and being the experiencing the racism and violence in this country. It kind of makes you think, "Ooh!" Gives you a big motivation to want to fight, but it also gives you empathy when you're seeing if this is going on with me, and you know how it makes you feel. Then when you see it happening to somebody else, you just can't help. You can't stand. You got to do something about it. And I guess that's one of the main things. And yeah, like a lot of people have, like the people here, you feel the empathy. You have your own pain and things, and you see it, and you can't sit by. You got to do something about it.
I don't see any other hands.
Phil, I've got my hand up.
You go. Okay.
Yeah. So, John, thank you very much. This has been it's interesting to see how these types of groups are handled by other governments. And I think there are two different fronts to this struggle. There's the one that you guys have been on, as far as the international community and actually going out to doing those field trips that you're doing. But I also think that there's another one, and we had a talk from Dov Baum from the American Friends Service Committee Corporate Accountability Project. And I wanted to get your thoughts on something that I see as a really good opportunity, but I think that a lot of progressive people tend to shy away from, which is using the power of predatory capitalism against itself. And the weaknesses in that predatory capitalist area is all the companies that are publicly traded, where so many of us have 401ks that can call 800 numbers and tie up their lines, tie up their email, so that it's another idea of putting your weight on the gears, like Mario
Yeah.
Savio talked about. And I wanted to see what you thought about that, and
Yeah.
if it's maybe just a case of where we haven't thought about those lines, or if there's real reticence with the people that you work with to do something like that.
Yeah. So yeah, the history of struggle. Um, you protest, you do that stuff, you talk about the international issues, you make the links and things like that, but try to stop business as usual.
Mm-hmm.
Go. So there's sit-ins and other things we've participated in, and other ways to try to make it impossible. And because the realization is, the corporations, they can't make a dime without us. We're the ones that make the stuff. They can't have any wealth or anything. And it really showed that in 2006 when the immigration community, which we were part of that as well, had the boycotts. They refused to go to work on May 1st. 1 million people or so decided not to go to work to stop that horrible Sensenbrenner bill. And that bill just disappeared after that because they lost billions of dollars from people not going out there. So yeah, we want to encourage that. One of the things that we did in the Harriet Tubman Center in 2003, I wrote a ballot initiative that finally got passed. We were supposed to collect 100,000 or so signatures to get it on the ballot, but we got it approved so we could start doing that. And it's interesting that Rusty Hicks, who was the head of the Federation of Labor at that time, he told one of us that, "How dare you do this?" It was an initiative for the minimum wage, for $15 minimum wage in 2013, which would have started right then immediately. It would have been taken place if that bill was voted on. Of course, we needed to get a ton of signatures that to happen, and UTLA, United Teachers of LA, endorsed it, and we're going to help get that out. And we wanted to get other unions, right? Then Rusty Hicks went in and said, no, we don't want to do that. And he told us that, you're spooking the mayor, Eric Garcetti. So Garcetti came up with another plan. That I guess last year or so, we finally got minimum wage thing going through. It took all that time. That was the alternate plan that they had. But that wouldn't have happened if they didn't get spooked. So one of the things we try to do is try to, force them. We weren't able to get the ballot thing going on, but we spooked them. So that we try to do that. But yeah, I think things like that, creative ways to stop business as usual, is very important. And I think we should put our heads together and figure out how we can do that.
Yeah, I think it's something that a bigger coalition of organizations can really do some really good work in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Thanks.
Rebecca, why don't you go ahead?
Okay, thanks. And thanks, John. It was great meeting you last week at a rally. I wanted to ask if you can shed some more light on your comment that you said that in Egypt, the media, they don't condemn Hamas, and that seems to be like the major, it's like the major theme that we hear in the Western media, that whenever we raise about what's happening in Gaza, the casualties and the indiscriminate bombings, and they say, but my automatic reaction is, do you condemn Hamas? So is that true for other countries in the Mideast too, that they avoid condemning Hamas?
Probably in Jordan, there's a lot of pressure to do something in solidarity with Gaza as well. But the Western media, it's of course it's international. It's hard to get a different version out. But if you look at the things that they've done since Lusitania, the Vietnam War, and the way they vilify and the Gaddafi or Saddam Hussein and others, and it's always kind of the same language. These the barbaric dictators, regimes, and they'll call them. They're always regimes, whether they got elected on or not. They're regimes, but whenever they're using this really horrid stuff, you hear they're accusing people of. And then you find out later on, the New York Times lied about it. Recently in Ukraine as well, they said the Russian people were rapes and things that were going on, and Ludmila, who was the ombudsman in Ukraine, said she had evidence of all this things that were going on, these rapes and things. And it was so obvious that it was false that even the Ukrainian government, parliament, fired her. And they said, you have to have evidence.
Right.
But the newspapers in Ukraine, Euromaidan Press, and they would pass that on to the New York Times and others, and they're still they're still using those same things that Ludmila said. In spite of that. So it makes you kind of wonder, but the thing with Hamas on October 7th, they said that 14 or so hundred civilians were killed by Hamas. Well, in the first place, this wasn't just Hamas. This is PFLP and DFLP, a united thing going on here. But they said they did that. And then the Israeli military said, no, it wasn't. They said people were they had pictures of people's being burned to death, and they'd show these videos and things. And then they admitted, even in the Haaretz newspaper in Israel, they admitted that, they were put on fire by the Apache helicopters because they were firing these Hellfire missiles that were supplied by Lockheed. Boeing supplied the Apache helicopters, and Lockheed's brought these laser guided missiles that that hit you and they can put you on fire. And that's actually what was doing that. So they had to go down to 1,200 people, they say, are civilians were caught. But they didn't mention the other facts that these Apaches things were discriminately. Even the military said, they couldn't tell the difference between who was Hamas and who wasn't. So they were discriminately killing folks. So many folks think that most likely it was more civilians that were killed by the Israeli military than Hamas. The other thing is they say the civilians and the settlers, before October happened, the United Nations said that the settler violence was a record that hadn't been seen before. They had a report in September about that. And this is violence with people who have arms. So the folks they call civilians, not always by civilians, and they're in a border where there are kibbutzes and other settlers that are there, and they're armed, sometimes with the IDF. And if they want to get out, well, there's only one way to go through. So, but anyway, you just have to question what's real and what's not real, especially when you see the New York Times never goes to the sources of the folks they're accusing. So,
can I follow up on that too? To me, what I see going on here is a misinformation campaign, and it's typical from our local law enforcement. We see this from the LAPD when they make up their arrest records and say, oh, this defendant was fighting us and we had to shoot and kill him. And it's well known that our local law enforcement in the US, including here in LA, has been trained in Israel. by IDF. And I see the similarities, here in this misinformation. And what really concerns me is it's the incident that happened recently when a Jewish protester was killed at a protest, and a man was arrested, he was charged with manslaughter. But the LA Jewish Federation put out a press release immediately after the man died and said that he was bludgeoned to death with a megaphone. There was no evidence found by the Ventura County Police that happened. Yet it was all over the Israeli media the next day, that press release from LA Jewish Federation. And then Lindsay Horvath, Board of Supervisors, put out a press release saying that he was also bludgeoned to death. Henry Stern, all these lawmakers picked up that press release and ran with it. A month later, Congress passed HR 894, which basically said that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. And in that resolution, it described Paul Kessler's death, that he was bludgeoned to death with a megaphone. And last week, the California Jewish Caucus put out a letter and condemning all the rising anti-Semitism, had the same statement in there. And to me, this is very dangerous now when we have our lawmakers now passing on this false and claiming that the California Jewish Caucus is threatening to conduct their own investigations into local campuses now. And I saw last weekend that the LA Jewish Federation was at UCLA leading safety classes for students now to protect themselves against violence. Mm-hmm. So what do you think we can do locally to address this misinformation?
Yeah, it's so important to get the information out and using the whatever social media have and forums and things like that. And I mean, up to the President Biden early on saying that, he saw evidence. It's definitely true that their heads were being cut off by Hamas. And then the day later, the Washington had to recount it and things and say, but so many things don't get recounted. And then if they do, they get a little paragraph in the newspaper. Meanwhile, the story just keeps going on and on. They really become the lie, these folks that are doing this. So it's just yet to...
They're addressing this in community with like groups that represent Arabs or Muslims, like HAR, for instance, because when I read these reports, like about Paul Kessler's death, the newspaper accounts go that there's rising anti-Semitism as reported by the ADL and LA County sheriffs or Ventura County sheriffs. But where's why is the ADL report involved in this? Well, they're the ones that were facilitating the trainings in Israel with local law enforcement.
Right.
And so, why aren't our law enforcement then working with the groups representing Arabs or Muslims, to come up with plans to, address this with the community? And it's just really dangerous and one-sided. And I see it getting worse. I mean, because HR 894, that was passed by a majority of Congress, overwhelmingly, it's leading to HUAC-style investigations now at our college campuses. And it's based on a lot of false information about rising anti-Semitism.
Right.
I think we have only 15 minutes left for questions.
Sorry.
Go ahead, John.
It's interesting how anti-Semitism, one of the first criticism of Zionism wasn't, it was by Jewish people, who many of whom were not Zionists, but they never bring that up. So well, it's really amazing how they bring these. But yeah,
We've got two more hands up, Steve and Dave.
Can
Yeah.
we give priority to people who have not asked questions already?
Go
Okay,
right ahead, Dave.
would that be you, Dave?
Yes, thank you. So, John, you led off with some comments about October 7th, which should be called Operation Al-Aqsa Flood, but it's most often called a terrorist attack, complete with multiple atrocities, right? So I wanted to get, this is also, I'm asking this question in light of the question of the legitimacy of Palestinian resistance groups and the legitimacy of the military operation on October 7th. And also wanted to know about the PFLP and the DFLP, and what do you know about the nature of Operation Al-Aqsa Flood, and what does anyone know about the alleged atrocities that took place on those 2 days? Thanks.
Yeah. It's interesting. They're saying that they had, when the Israelis were asked about it, they said, well, we didn't have time to get any evidence of the rapes and other things. We didn't have time to collect the evidence and things like that. And when the United States Commission responded, they had getting ready to do an investigation on these allegations.
John, you said the United States. I think you mean the United
I said the United.
Nations.
Oh my goodness! Wow, you're right. United Nations Commission had an investigation that they were trying to get on the allegations of the rapes and things, and the Israeli government just refused to give any information. They said we cannot work with you on this, whatever reason. But so it makes it a little suspect. Where's the evidence that should be there? Now, what was the other thing? The other point?
You mentioned that in that military operation Al-Aqsa Flood, there were.
Right.
You didn't mention the Palestine Islamic Jihad, which I think is also a resistance group, but you did mention the PFLP and the DFLP.
And the DFLP,
can you talk about them? Can you talk about them and their?
I should have mentioned them as well. They had a press conference, a united press conference, Islamic Jihad and DFLP and PFLP, and they were making a point with Hamas that this was a unified action that was going on. And this was an action that was trying to stop the Saudi Arabian, Jordanian, Indian cooperation with Israel, because they knew that, especially this Indian Middle Eastern convoy that was supposed to go through, so they have an alternate to the Suez Canal. They had a pipeline that was going right by Gaza and West Bank, which, by the way, was kind of close to whatever the missiles from Gaza or whatever, going right by the West Bank. I think they felt like they had to get rid of the Palestinian people. They had to get rid of Gaza, the people in Gaza, in order to make this happen. So this action that was happening on October 7th was to try to stop this negotiation with them as well. So that was one of the other main things.
John,
and
John, just you haven't. Would you just tell us what the PFLP and DFLP
Oh, yeah.
stand for? What are they?
So
what are the organizations and what's their history?
So the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine and the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine. So the PFLP, they've had differences. They, the Hamas, when Hamas was voted in 2006, what was it? They were voted into as the leadership of Gaza, and the coalition forces, PFLP and others, with Hamas, there was a split, and Hamas kind of took over. Political way of folks in PFLP and Hamas saw was they hadn't been united in many of their approaches, but this action, with the increased amount of settler violence that was going on, they seem to have they've become more of a united force. So whatever government or whatever it is, the U.S. is saying it can only be PFLP. It can't be Hamas or anyone else. They don't agree with that right now. So those are.
I think Steve is up next.
Thank you. As we move closer to the end, John, I wanted to pick up on a theme that's come up a couple times, and partly because this is MLK week, and a lot of people are extolling King, but they overlook his radical analysis of American domestic and foreign policy when at the Riverside Church he identified the triple evils of the most violent country in the world, the United States, as racism, militarism, and materialism. So how do you relate the struggle for Palestinian rights to our own domestic struggles, which you've been involved in for decades? And is that why you're seeing such huge protests in America? Black Lives Matter years ago identified the Palestinian struggle as aligned and allied with the domestic struggle against racism. And do you believe that coalition linking those efforts is a hopeful sign for a radical and progressive attack on U.S. imperialism?
Yeah, there's so much of a history of this solidarity. I know, and then George Floyd was killed by the police, or was it Michael Brown? I can't remember which one. One of the Palestinian people, with all a horrible and denial of basic things, they still organized pizzas to send to the demonstrators, and it was either in Minnesota or St. Louis, one of these places. But that solidarity, and we see that in South Africa too, with the suit, the loss of the International Commission, that was so really makes it clear what's going on there. And a link to the struggle here is, we know, especially in the people of color in the communities, the police brutality and repression that's going on, the helicopters. It was interesting at the MLK parade. we could hear the helicopters going around all the time. I live in South Central. I kind of see that all the time, and I wonder some of the folks who were in the demonstration as well to say, oh, you know that, yeah, this is kind of familiar. Actually, they wouldn't let us finish our route because there was a shooting, and we found out that was baloney. There was no shooting by the police, but the reality is that in a decade, this is the most amount of killings. Every year they break a record, and they broke another record of police shootings. And so it's something we're very familiar with, not to the extent of what's going on now. But then you look at the folks who are profiting from this, the military industrial complex and the oil companies and the banks and things, and you see those folks that are profiting off of the misery of Gaza, and you see the same people that are ones that are foreclosing your homes and raising your rents and making inflation so high that it makes foods cost go. So it's like a big wage cut because you're paying so much more for food and things, and you can't get health care, and you're paying more for that. And so you're seeing the same folks who are creating this situation. And you see, we have the same enemy. If you have the same enemy, then if you come together, the things that you can do, because like I said before, the profits, the power that they have only comes from the labor that we create. We create their wealth. We create without the going to work, without they don't have the power. So once we understand the power that we have, and become more in solidarity with other struggles. And it's interesting that they have multiple attacks. Like right now, there's a big trend. There's a big attack on the trans community. There's a big attack on women. It's like, wow, you can't have abortions anymore. You can't have this. You can't have just basic things that people took it granted for. Now in Florida and other states, and it's growing. They're taking away these basic rights of women and LGBTQ communities and things. And the police violence is still going on. Once we realize that all of these issues, we have an interest in standing with the people who are suppressed by this, building a stronger movement, we can change things. Maybe we can change this system. So.
Thank you, John. Just to follow up, because you made a linkage we made last year when we, at our annual awards event in September last year, the theme was housing is a human right. But through the insights of Carol Francis and others, when we recognized Anthony and Jill and other U.S. housing rights advocates, we purposely recognize Palestinian housing rights advocates because of home demolition and the destruction of housing as a human right there, which only emphasizes that this didn't start on October 7. And I think you've given some of the analysis to the history of that region. And you cannot just start the clock on a day and ignore the history and the suffering of the Palestinian people, as you pointed out, for 75 years. So I think you've helped us make those connections. And I think that is truly, you're right, to the extent that, and this comes back to our reflection, to the extent that the evils are connected through the military-industrial complex writ large, when the evils are connected, then the solidarity of the opposition to those evils are connected. And you find people coming out. They may have their own issue, but you build coalitions and you build solidarity by recognizing the causes of your partners in this work and then multiply the power that you can achieve by that kind of consolidation. We only have, say, 5 minutes. If you'd tell us about the Harriet Tubman Center, a little more history on why you, but I don't want to ignore Carol Francis. You can put this in your thinking cap if you'd like to end with Harriet Tubman and her history and why your center's named after her. But I see that Carol Francis has her hand up.
I just want to say Dave put into the chat a link to John's last forum with us. So if you want to hear it, you just go to your chat, click on the link, and you can listen to it later. It will be there on your computer.
So then, John, you could finish by describing Harriet Tubman, why, and the work of that group.
Yeah, so from the $15 thing to the anti-war movement to other things, and a lot of times we don't, folks may not know we might be involved in, but we do a lot of coalition work and trying to build folks together. And we don't care if we don't get credit for starting something or whatever. It's more important to get the cooperation of all the organizations together. So that's one thing we're always trying to strive to do. And sometimes we'll try to use the elections to get as most have a louder voice and doing things. And of course, all the folks who are targeted by the LAPD here and the sheriffs and others, and we will always try to go to those communities and help elevate their voice as well. It's very important. And also the union struggles, whether it's stopping the closing of a shopping center in Compton that we tried to do with the help of the SCLC, and other things with the United Farm Workers efforts for the grocery strike and things like that. We always try the importance of unions we understand, and the importance of the unity of the different ethnicities and things. And there's a lot of divisions that are trying to create. Sometimes it comes from the left or the right about, well, this grouping. Sometimes folks will say, well, some folks, white folks, are they're not really part of the working class or something like that, but if you look at the United UAW and what they were so successful last year, a few months ago, they got a contract that was unprecedented in how much it helped. The new leadership of the UAW is being recognized and recognizes the oppression of people of color. And the UAW is a very strong union because of the solidarity. And we see that the working class unity, when the unions are strong, and when they win, then everybody wins. And it's interesting that the UAW is the only union now that is saying that it's in solidarity with the people of Gaza. They're calling for a ceasefire, a big union to do that. So that's very inspiring that this is going on, and there are unions that are refusing to load the ships and the ports that are going to Israel. So we have to encourage that with the rank and file, SEIU and others, encourage them to keep the same, take the inspiration from the UAW, because we're all sisters and brothers, and others and gendered others that have a interest in humanity. And the folks who are the politicians that put their careers above humanity, we have to call them out and get rid of them. I don't mean get rid of them in a mean way. I mean vote them out or whatever.